Aaron Hurst, how are you, my friend?
Doing great to be here with you.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. And man, I'm really excited for people who I know that there's a lot of people who know who you are and kind of your work and what you've done. But I'm really excited for people to get to know you, your story, your work a little bit deeper in a time that I think we both could agree is needed more than ever in our lifetimes.
Oh, absolutely, and I've just been so impressed with the traction you've had and the community you've built around this work. Really good to be able to partner with you just to get the message out, and as we grow this movement, to be able to do that together.
Absolutely. And that's what it is. It is a movement and it is
Yep.
about doing it together. And for those of you who are listening today we're here with Aaron Hurst. Aaron Hurst is an amazing human being. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Purpose Economy. He is the founder of Taproot Foundation and Imperative. And in my opinion, has really been a trailblazer in what I call the purpose space. You know, there's a lot of people talking about purpose, but Aaron really kind of brought this conversation to the forefront many years ago. And so, you know, Aaron, if you would, and start wherever you would like, I would really like to have the listeners today get a full understanding of kind of how you arrived at this work, kind of your story and journey towards the purpose economy and this purpose space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess I would just start with my purpose personally, because I think that's a sort of important place to start, given this work. And the poetic version of my purpose is to awaken lions so they can care for their pride, which to me is just really about. I like to instill courage in people so that they can truly show up and live their purpose, and so they can be active members of their community, and that they can care for their pride. And that's really what drives me, and it's sort of a common thread is you sort of look at my career and look at the choices I've made. That's really what gets me up in the morning. It's the problem I see in the world that I want to help with. But in terms of actually a narrative story, it's really the family business. So I appreciate you calling me a trailblazer. I actually come from a family of trailblazers that were doing this way before either of us was born. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I think one, just out of um, the sense of privilege. I mean, it's been a privilege to come from a family where this has been sort of our life's work as a family. I think a lot of people don't have exposure to that. They don't have parents, grandparents, family who like put this front and center, and just was very lucky. I don't think I realized it at the time, but just to come from that as a background. So, I think back, my grandfather, he went to Harvard Business School and then went over to Germany as an officer to help rebuild Germany after the war. And out of that experience, he just saw that there was this incredible challenge when cultures don't understand each other, when we don't have social connection between different cultures. We start to easily vilify each other. It's easy to sort of turn people against each other. And he saw firsthand how that happened with World War II. And he dedicated his career to trying to figure out, like, how do we prevent another world war from happening?
Mm.
And one of his key insights was that if you actually spend time, not as a tourist, but spend time with another culture, um, doing something that's of mutual value to the community, that through that process, you build a sense of humanity and connection between two people and two cultures. And he had this idea that the US should really focus on investing in a formal program to have people actually go abroad for an extended period of time and to really be of service, to work with a sense of purpose towards not the US's agenda, but towards whatever the need is locally, to really empathize and connect with, another culture. And he put that recommendation in front of President Kennedy as a member of his team, and that basically became the impetus for the Peace Corps, which I think is really one of the early, I think, really profound purpose programs out there. And it was all about, how do you use purpose to bring communities together? How do we use purpose as a way to bridge cultural divides? So I share that with you because I think that's been such an inspiration for me as a model. And as I sort of look at my career, did similar work as an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, teaching creative writing in the local prisons using students from the university, using this active service as a way to understand each other, to be able to break down stereotypes, to humanize people that otherwise you would not, even think of as human beings, and just how powerful that was. With the Taproot Foundation, which which you mentioned earlier, again, sort of saw this need to have business and nonprofit professionals truly understand each other, and saw that there had been sort of an us and them that had actually been created between these two sectors, with stereotypes about each other, a lack of trust, a lack of respect, and realized in the sort of contemporary economy and market, like we had to find a way for these sectors to work together and not against each other. And Taproot really was built off of the idea of the Peace Corps of like, how do we get people to do in-depth service for the nonprofit sector that is truly forcing them to build real relationships and to add real value. And, saw that, just take off. We ended up with 7 offices across the country, worked with the president and created a national campaign around it, and then worked with BMW to take that around the world. So there's now programs like that in 30, different countries, from China to Costa Rica. And then, you brought up my book, The Purpose Economy. The Purpose Economy, to me, was when I felt like we were at this sort of tipping point as I was leaving Taproot, and realizing that so much of what was happening in the workforce, so much of what was happening in the consumer markets and in trends, was actually pointing to a fundamental shift in the economy. And my uncle, who was an economist at Stanford, had coined the term information economy back in the 70s and shown that we had moved from an industrial to an information economy. And what I saw was maybe the 4th economy in history emerging, where the creation of purpose and meaning and the sort of embrace of psychology, frankly, was going to transform the market and become actually not just a niche economy, but the broader one. And we've seen that, largely come true, as we've seen the Business Roundtable embrace it. We've seen now so much of the business world embrace it. But what I was trying to do there is a similar thing, which is showing that purpose is a business imperative. It's not a nice to have. Putting it in economic terms, not into religious or social terms, and say, even if you don't believe in this stuff, like, your business is going to go out of business if you don't embrace it. And sort of making that case back in 2013 that was where we needed to go. And then my current work, just to bring it sort of bring it to current day, what I realized was that there was a need to bring everyone together as human beings and reconnect people as human beings through purpose. And that we needed to use the science of purpose to actually develop a new way for people to communicate and to build relationships. And in Built Imperative, as a venture-backed technology company that's built a peer coaching platform. So it's basically a technology platform that matches employees inside companies for guided conversations on a regular basis, where we're putting insights about their purpose into it, so that they're not just doing this one time, like, what's my purpose, what's the company's purpose? They're actually tailoring their job every 2 weeks to optimize it around purpose, and they're building like a truly meaningful relationship. Because as I look at what's going on in the world, like, that's what we need more than anything. We need people reconnected around purpose, and just didn't see it happening. Everything is going the opposite direction. So I'll stop there. That's a long introduction.
There is a lot there, though, and it's so powerful, and I love the journey. I didn't know the depth. I know I've heard a little bit of the backstory, but the depth of how rooted this is, all the way back to the foundational pieces of the Peace Corps and how your family's involved in that, and where that's taken you, and then kind of how that was impressed upon your heart at such an early age, and has really, because there's a lot of people out there that talk about purpose. Purpose, in my opinion, has become a very commoditized term.
Sure.
Selling purpose, but this is really something that has been at the root of your family, your history, your legacy, and kind of has shaped who you've become. And I love how you took it into this natural space of humanizing people who otherwise wouldn't have. I loved that term, because that's so more needed now than ever. But then constantly rolling the ball and saying, how can we take this and where can we apply it, all the way to the point of imperative, where it's like, how can we get this to every single person on a daily basis to reinforce who they are and what they do and the work that they do every day, and the fact that they matter. Because that's something that I think that most people are struggling right now, is this sense, especially in remote workforces, this disjointedness of, does my work really even matter anymore? I used to be able to see the fruits of my labor, and now I really can't. That's an epidemic in itself, beyond the
Absolutely.
COVID epidemic. But you mentioned, we talked about your book, The Purpose Economy, and you mentioned this foreshadowing of this 4th economy, out of the informational and then into the purpose piece. And you talked about purpose being something that truly, whether you believed in this stuff or not, if you didn't do it, you'd be out of business. My favorite cartoon that you have shared, I love it. I've shared it with my entire team. I've shared it with clients. I've shared it in keynote talks that I've done, and pointed the finger back at you and said, you got to check this guy out. But I love the image of the tsunami wave that says
Yep.
Purpose Economy on it and Biz Corp dry since 18 whatever. And you got one executive's out there having his cappuccino, and another one walks out and puts his umbrella up and feels a little spritz, doesn't know what's coming. And then you see this next generation of influencers, innovators, leaders that are rushing towards the tsunami with their surfboards because they get it. And it just does such a great job of visualizing that, that the old adage of, you either watch things happen, make things happen, or say what happened, right? And that cartoon does a really great job. I think there's a lot of companies right now that are kind of feeling, that are asking kind of like, what happened, right? I mean, a lot of what you wrote about 8 years ago was prophetic and is actually unveiled before our eyes. There's a lot of companies right now saying, what happened?
Well, I think a lot of that, when I was doing keynotes around the book, I used that graphic as well, which I love. I love that you have found utility in it. Is that I had worked in Silicon Valley for a number of years in the 90s, late 90s. And it was sort of right when companies were embracing technology. And you really saw a difference between the ones that said, okay, yeah, information economy, I better build a website, versus the ones that said, like, crap, I need to change every single aspect of my business. And largely the ones that just built a website are no longer with us. It's the ones that realized they had to re-engineer their entire business that are there. And I think the same thing has happened with purpose. You had the ones that were just like, okay, yeah, purpose, let's do volunteering, let's do philanthropy. That was the equivalent of the website, versus the ones that truly understood that it changed every single aspect of how they needed to approach their business. And we're seeing those are the companies that are really thriving now and will continue to, are the ones that got that this is like, it's at a DNA level. It's not about volunteering.
That's exactly right. Because I think people immediately, purpose means different things to different people, right? And so companies are trying to get on board with the purpose economy by either saying, how do we revisit our CSR strategy? How do we do more volunteering? How do we just insert the word purpose into our titles? Chief Purpose Officer, Chief People Officer, Chief. But they're not really revisiting the DNA of who they are, why they exist, and what it is that they exist to do. And going back to kind of even the purpose point of why they began in the first place, and was the original reason that they were in business, is that need not there anymore, and do they need to pivot into something else to continue to fulfill the purpose of their organization? How do you? Yeah, God, we're gonna say.
No, I was gonna say, and I think one thing that's really important about this, just like with the information economy, it's like you can't be Pollyannish about it. Like, purpose isn't in and of itself a good or bad thing. Psychology is not a good or bad thing. It's in the application of it and understanding that it's a force that's happening. I would argue that a lot of the problems that we have in our country right now are also due to a lack of purpose. I think the political challenges we have with QAnon and all these other movements, they're largely because people lack a sense of purpose, and they're looking for something to believe in. They're looking for something to give them meaning. They're looking for something to give them relevance, right? Yeah. And if we think of it as a political expression, we're missing the point. It is fundamentally people are lacking that in their lives. And that's where a lot of extremism comes from, is people lacking a sense of purpose and needing that so badly that they're willing to just tie on to anything that'll give that to them, even if ultimately it's destructive, right? Yeah. So I think it's really important to understand, like, this is all extremism and terrorism are like on one end, and then there's like altruism and, social benefit on the other end. But these things are all part of a purpose continuum of psychologically something that people need, and we can either offer them, ignore it and sort of allow that sort of fringe to grow, or we can sort of say, look, this is a human need. Like, how are we meeting it as companies? How are we meeting it as a society? And be honest about that need.
That's so true. You think about basic human needs, and you would look at, a company that maybe doesn't give their employees, a lunch break or, whatever break. You recognize the need for food, the need for water, the need to go to the restroom. These are all basic human needs. Purpose is just as much, if not even more, of a need than all of those things. And how are we finding those connection points on a daily basis? Purpose isn't just something that you bring someone in to talk about, or you do a workshop around, or you implement as a strategy, right? It is a daily basic need of every human being in every workforce, in every industry, knowing that they matter, that there's a sense of belonging, that there's a sense of contribution, that there is something that they are waking up to and contributing to every single day.
Yeah. No, and I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs has done us a real disservice in a lot of ways.
Mm.
I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs is based on a fear-based mindset versus
Yes.
an abundance-based mindset. If you have an abundance-based mindset, you don't process it the same way, which is why, like, if you and I were to go on a trip to a very, you know, poor country, to a small village, you'd find people who are like not sure where they're going to get their next meal, but who have prioritized purpose and who have a lot of meaning in their lives. And you and I can go into a corporate boardroom and find people that are, you know, multi millionaires who are miserable human beings, right? And who don't prioritize it. So a lot of what's, I think, prevented the adoption and acknowledgement of this is recognizing that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not the right way to be thinking about this, and that we've got to think more about abundance versus scarcity mindset, and how to get people into an abundance mindset, because that's ultimately what's going to enable people to embrace this work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The abundance mindset has never been needed more. I don't know if you've, I'm sure you've probably at least come across her, but Gabrielle Boucher, she wrote
Sure.
her new book, The Purpose Factor, right? She'll
Yep.
also be speaking at the Purpose Summit alongside of
Right
you.
on.
And she was on this live cast maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago.
Yep.
And one of the things that she said is there's so many people that are out there worried about getting their slice of the pie when we really need to move to a society where we realize, hey, we have a whole kitchen. Why don't we just make more pie? Right?
Yep.
Why aren't we
Yep.
making more pie rather than fighting over slices of pie?
Yep.
And it was such a great illustration. And that's really the mindset shift that that we as individuals not just need to make, but really entire organizations need to be making.
I think it's that one, and then there's an us and them mindset. And I think we all are raised to have an us and them mindset. And I feel like most bad decisions executives make that I see are because they don't even realize it, but they're creating an us and them mindset.
Yes.
And they're saying, like, the workers need this, which is different than what I need, or it's different than what my family needs, right?
Right.
If as a CEO you say, every job in my company should be one that I'd be happy to have my kids take,
Yes.
you suddenly radically change your mindset on every single job and how you operate. But as
Yes.
long as you can rationalize, like, that's them, and there's a different set of rules for that, you're not going to really be able to break through this challenge. And I think that really is for executives. You know, the main shift that I push them to consider is just consider every job in your organization being for your kids, and make it so that you be happy with them taking that job. Maybe not for their whole career, but if there's jobs where you're like, no, like this, you know, someone's just gonna be hard off, they don't have enough money. Like, for some people, like, this is just, you know, this is what they need to get through and like suffer through it. You completely dehumanized your company and those people. And I think that's where and that's sort of and that's also built into the scarcity mindset, and a dehumanizing of people. And I think it's very prevalent. And I, you know, even though I've been lecturing on this forever, like, I still catch myself doing it. It's so ingrained in our culture, sort of our attitude towards work and our attitude towards sort of the us and them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's ingrained in us, even in human beings, right? We're innately self-centered, selfish human beings. I mean, we have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old at home, and my wife is, probably the most selfless person that I've ever met. There are people who say that I'm selfless. I would like to believe that. But our kids are constantly arguing over, who gets the bigger bowl of popcorn, the bigger slice of pie, the bigger whatever. And it's
Yep.
like, where did that learned behavior come from? Because we didn't teach it. So it's ingrained that way. And then even then there's this us versus me versus them mentality between the two of them that we're constantly trying to break even in our own
Yep.
household. But yet that translates, when we get older, it gets worse. And even on a company ladder, the closest thing that we've seen to this, I mean, it's sad that we even actually saw this play out, right? Is even in this last season of time with the pandemic, we saw companies pivot because they needed to, right? We saw manufacturing companies that used to make cars start making ventilators. We saw liquor companies that made vodka and tequila start making sanitizer, and it all
Basically the
smelled
same
terrible,
product. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But they changed what they didn't change their purpose. They just changed what they made. Their purpose to make stuff that people needed still existed. They just changed what it is they made. But even then, in the midst of humankind's biggest need, there was still this race to who got it first and who got the biggest contract and who, like, where does it end? How do you break that mindset to realize that abundance mindset, that if we just focus on how we can contribute to the moment, and we can contribute to our people and truly treat them like they're a part of it, that we can get rid of so many of these issues that have haunted us for decades.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, you raise a good point, bring it down with kids. I would point out my kids do the same thing, but I also find that like one of them's hurt, like they're the first one to jump in and try to help their sibling, even if it like comes at a cost to them. So I think both things are true simultaneously. Like there's no one who cares more and is more passionate about, you know, my son than my daughter, and vice versa. Like they would fight to support each other. So it's, I think there is like we have to recognize both sides of that, the duality of that. And I don't know, I've interviewed a lot of CEOs about purpose, and what I find is most of them want to do this work. They just don't feel like they have a system or structure that allows them to have the courage for it, which goes back to my purpose, right? Um, Sort of awakening lions so they can care for their pride. And that's a large reason why I wrote The Purpose Economy. I wanted to create a framework that would enable CEOs to say, no, this isn't a feel-good thing, this is a business decision, and to sort of normalize this idea, right? And I think that sort of started creating a domino effect where we got to the point where, you know, you are seeing CEOs come together and say, shareholder value is not the only thing that matters, right? And that to me was like a key moment. Just even if that hasn't been fully implemented, just the expression of that together, because what I saw is each of them alone felt like they didn't have the social capital with their boards, their teams, with this, you know, shareholders to do that. But when they came together and in a sense unionized, basically became a CEO union demanding this change. That's what actually gave them that sort of collective bargaining power to make this a priority. So I do think it's possible, but it does require like coming together that way and stating to get like sharing the risk.
Yes, sharing the risk. That's good.
Yeah,
To kind of go a little bit deeper on what you
please.
just said about that, there's two different when I think of different, CEOs that might be listening to this or that we're thinking of, right? You have those that like, yes, I get it. I want to do this. I know I need to, but I don't know how. And again, that's where you come in and we talked about that. But then we also know there's that other group, right? That purpose is fluffy. It's we don't have time for it. We don't have money for it. We don't have resources for it. We just need to focus on results, doing the same thing that we've always done. The 7 dying words of an organization, right? Like where, how have you? Well, and I would offer there's a third group. There's the third group that wants to do it just because they see the ROI. Right. So you
Yep.
have the group that wants to do it because it's the right thing to do. And they're like, help us, give us the tools and resources.
Yep.
The second group that says, we don't have the time, we don't want to do it. And they're making excuses. We're just going to do what we've always done. And then you have the third group that says, we want to do it, but they want to do it for the wrong reasons because it's trendy, it's popular, or there's ROI attached. How have you navigated conversations amongst those 3 leader groups?
So I'd characterize the third a little bit differently. So I think there's the first one's pretty clear and the second one's pretty clear. I think the third one, I think if people see ROI in it, I don't see that as a problem. I think if they're just doing it as a trend and they're just going to pick up the next thing the next day, that's a problem. But if they say like, I'm not going to be able to retain employees if I don't do this, and I'm not going to be able to build products and a brand that people care about if I don't do this, I don't know that that's necessarily like a bad thing. That's part of how a market works. So, you know, the way I see it is I always go back to the diffusion of innovation curve, which I just think is like, it helps explain so much in the world. I don't know how recently you've looked at it, but to me, it's like such a core model of just looking at, you know, who are those earliest adopters? What do they look like? And those are going to be the true believers. They're going to be the trendsetters. Then you're going to have that next wave, which are going to be the people who are the early adopters who they'll do it, but they're looking for the ROI. They won't do it without the ROI, and they're part of that curve. And then it's only once it's usually like government regulated or the systems, the technology, et cetera, that's in place just makes it so it's more expensive to avoid it than to embrace it. Do they tip? And then finally, the laggards are only going to do it if they go out of business and they're basically forced out of the market, or if it's regulated to the point where it's like illegal or they have no choice, right? And same thing that happened with technology. There's still people who are like, my company doesn't need technology. Like there's still probably a couple of those folks, right? But you saw that it started off that way, and you sort of got that. You got a lot of people, though. The majority of people, they had to have the ROI to make the shift. So that's how I look at it. So I generally think the laggard population or the people just fundamentally don't get it. Like I'm not going to change their mind. Like that's a psychological profile. What I can do is make the sort of early folks look as sexy as possible and make the ROI as clear as possible so that next group wants to join, and you build that critical mass. So that's how I think about it, very much on that diffusion of innovation curve.
That's really, really good. And that visual, I mean, I've used it a million times, from, the cell phone and talking about driving down the phone in
Yep.
1994 and saying, who's so important that they can't wait to get to where they're going, that they have to have a
Yep.
bag, a Zach Morris phone in their car, right? And now it's like, if you leave your house and you don't have your phone, I don't care how far you're going, you're turning around and you're getting it. But we all have that, and it's the same thing with social media. We can do it, but that's a really good way to look at it. But I think there's even something deeper. I agree
Sure.
with you that
Yeah.
there's if people do it because they see the ROI, they see it as a business decision, that's not a bad thing, because that at least gets them creating a purpose-driven economy within their organization, within their people group. But we both also know that there are going to be times where, like anything else, maybe the ROI isn't there initially, or where they thought it would be, or whatever the case is, or for a minute it doesn't make business sense. And to your point, it's trendy, they move on to the next thing, they stop, which is we know ultimately not going to be a great decision, and not sustainable, which is something I know that you're passionate about talking about. But coming back to this idea of kind of this purpose movement, which we've
Yep.
both used that term, you've really championed that term, purpose movement. How do we get people to it's easy to have your early adopters, and then make the ROI clear, get people to do it because they see the ROI, they see the retention models, they see the business model, they see all of that, until it doesn't make sense. How do we get them to be true believers, not because they've just seen the ROI, not because they've seen it proven itself, but because it moves from here to here and they want to contribute to the purpose movement?
I mean, the Marshall Gans at Harvard, I think I love his sort of movement building framework. And, he talks about self, us, and now, which I just think is an interesting framework. Like, if you don't first start with their own truth, so forget the company, et cetera, it's like connect them to their own purpose as an individual. If you don't have that as an anchor point, like, it's going to be ethereal. It'll be like, you know, go away with the first sort of challenge. And then it's us. They need to feel like they're part of a community that also shares that. And there's some shared purpose, some shared set of values, some shared commitment to it. So again, when it's challenged, they know that there's other people there, and it's like a social norm around it. And then now is the application of it. So it's, how does that actually show up in their business? How are they applying that to get benefit? But I always feel like, and he talks about it more as all happening concurrently, which I think is probably true, but I find it helpful to think about them as steps. Sort of, we need to help people define their truth, sort of the us and then the now. And so that's sort of one thing I would share. The second thing, there's different types of entrepreneurs. I'm a systems entrepreneur. So for me, change is through creating systems that reinforce behavior, right? So I don't think it's enough just to say you have a bunch of leaders who believe in this stuff. You actually have to create a change in the flow of the ocean within the organization. Otherwise, you're right. Anytime like they hit anything, like they're just going to go back to where they were, right? So we have to be changing systems. And the reality is, I mean, if you just look at it from a technology standpoint, just about every technology used inside companies reinforces the wrong idea about business and about work. It's highly transactional. It reinforces the idea of sort of us and them. It sort of dehumanizes work. So all those systems are basically like a counter current. And until we can build new technology to replace those, things will start to just go back to where they were if we don't address that. So that's a lot of like where I'm focused with my work, is how do we change the technology stack? And you see a lot of the technology that they're using the word purpose, but they're largely full of shit in terms of what's actually going on. And then you look at what's going on more socially. I mean, Facebook is a great example of like a app that has fundamentally, I think, created a scarcity mindset in a lot of people. It's divided people, and companies are now like, how do we get that into our companies, right? That's sort of a big move within Silicon Valley. Is how do we use those same network effects, that same model, to like bring it inside the enterprise? And unless we design that very intentionally, it's going to be really problematic.
That is so very well stated. I love the mental image of changing the tide systematically within the organization, and specifically doing that through technology, which obviously is kind of the core of where you're at. And one of the values that we always talk. I mean, we champion four values in our company, and one of them is being transformational, not transactional, right? Always choosing to be transformational, not transactional. If it's transactional and it's not transformational, we don't do it. And there's way, way too many things out there that are just simply transactional and not transformational. That's such a great visual of the tide turn.
No, and that's where I think the majority of purpose consulting falls short, because what it's doing is it's creating a short-term appetite, but it's not changing the systems. And I think that's where a lot of CEOs have struggled. Like they want to do something that's much more systemic, but most of the solutions that are provided to them on the purpose front, but then also just more broadly, aren't actually changing the systems. And I think until we can get to that point, we've got to go and fundamentally go from mail to email equivalent, and we're still sort of talking about email but using mail. And that's sort of how that shift has to happen. And most companies have no idea how to go about doing it, even if they want to.
That's another good real analogy, right? And they're kind of still stuck back in the other, and the things that hold us back, right? Usually it goes back to that same curve that we already talked about, right? There's fear, there's adoption issues, all of those things. But as I would love to dive deeper into those, but I know that we're coming up on the back end of this talk here, and you said something that I want to make sure that we make time for.
Okay.
And you talked about the sustainability aspect of this entire conversation, right?
Yep.
And I know that you're going to be speaking on creating sustainable purpose at the Purpose Summit in May. And so I don't want you to tip your hat too much and do your obvious keynote here. But May is still 3 months away. And there's a lot of things that we learned in this last year can happen in 3 months. And you kind of gave a little bit of a teaser video that went out earlier this week. But if you could just share a little bit right now, what are some small points right now that people could be doing, small steps that they could be doing right now that at least move us in the direction of creating purpose, not just the right way, but in a sustainable way within organizations, and then maybe even allude to what you'll be talking on in May?
The key thing I plan to talk about, but you're right, May's far away. So by then, maybe it'll be something completely different. We'll talk about dragons and rainbows and who knows what. But, if I were to, talk right now to the community, I think just talk about the fact that purpose largely resides in the space between two people and between groups of people. And that's where it stays alive. If it can't just sit within one person, it has to be held between two people within a community. That's what makes it sustainable. And that if we really want to sort of achieve this broader change, we need to start with changing the infrastructure in our own lives and our teams and our organizations to ensure that conversations about purpose, and I would say more broadly, just conversations that are about caring, they're about empathy, they're about inclusion, they're about curiosity. One of my favorite pieces of advice, and I need to find out where it came from because I forget, but just you don't really know someone until you know what their hopes, their ambitions, and their dreams are. And I think so much of what we've done is we've based it on race and gender and title and all these things, and they actually they're important, but they get in the way of like truly seeing somebody. We need to put that between us in a conversation and as a community and hold each other to those hopes and dreams and ambitions. And that's what's going to create a systemic change that's hard to sort of turn the other way. Because we'll hold it together as a community. So, my work now is very much focused on how do we do that at scale? How do we make that a regular drumbeat within a culture? So I'm excited to share, what we found so far, what's working, what's not working, what the science is showing around how to actually do that. Because we've got to change the systems. We can't just be making beautiful purpose statements.
So good. So good. And I love how, sometimes we complicate the most simplistic of things. It really boils down from a starting point. A basic starting point is we really need to see people, right? We need to see people for who they are. And we've created all of these other things that get in the way of that. And, so again, with May being kind of so far off, for companies that right now have, it feels like the Titanic is in the other direction and they can't 180 overnight. Where do you start? Where do you start organizationally with kind of calling a timeout and saying, listen, we need to see people. We really need to see people for who they are, to eliminate this us versus them mentality, to eliminate some of these, social, political, economic, demographical divides, all of those things, and just truly see people. What's a great starting point?
I mean, the one that I find that like resonates for people who may or may not be sort of fully in the purpose camp or not, but that they can actually like mainstream, is to really point to the difference between consulting and coaching. Consulting is generally about hierarchy, expertise, knowledge, and telling someone how to do something. Coaching is about helping someone see who they are and what's possible, and having them find the path by supporting them and helping ask questions that help them see it, right? Consulting tends to lead to, and this is not all consulting practices, but that as a culture, a consulting culture tends to lead to a critical, judgmental, and deficit-based culture. A coaching culture tends to lead to a much more purpose-driven culture, which is about holding people up and supporting each other and not needing to prove anything or change someone's course. So if nothing else, so just really examine, like, do you have a consulting culture? Or do you have a coaching culture? And how can you instill more of that coaching culture? And it's not about becoming certified coaches. It's about asking open-ended questions. It's about helping people solve their own challenges, holding up a mirror to people to show them how amazing they are and inspire them to want to be that person. That one change to me is something we can all start right away. And we can also examine our own conversations. I mean, I'm sure you and I are guilty all the time of operating as consultants to our spouses and to our friends and to our kids, and just to be more aware of when we're doing it so that, we can say, is that how I want to show up for them?
That's so powerful. You just gave me such a great visual that like I can't even wait to get home and implement with my son, because I'm seriously, I'm very guilty of doing exactly that. And my wife on many occasions has said, "Don't treat me like one of your clients." That's happened a lot over the many years.
Well, I mean, you spend so many hours, you build that, but it's just why it has to be systemic. Like, you have to treat your clients as coaches, like you have to coach them as well, and try to change that whole frame of how you relate to people. And no one's looking for you to solve their problems. They're looking for you to cheer them on to solve their own problems.
That's exactly right. And going back to your purpose statement, say it again, of being a lion, just
Awaken lions so they can
awaken the
care for
lion,
their pride,
care for their pride.
which is
One of the
coaching. Yep.
Very catching. One of the things that Amy, my wife, has constantly challenged me on is, I'm always obviously saying that the greatest measure of purpose is who we help others become, and she's always challenging back with, well, how does that relate to your son and your daughter and whatnot and everything? And I
Yep.
try to be very intentional at home. But you gave me this amazing visual between the difference of coaching and consulting, of helping people see even themselves, asking enough questions and listening enough that we get a sense of who they are to a level that we see something in them that they don't even see in themselves. And I have this visual, and maybe it's from a movie because I could see it so clearly, but I have this visual of kind of like a lion cub looking in a mirror and seeing a roaring lion like back at him. And
Yep.
so my job as a father, and I would say my job as a coach and as a leader, is to help those young cubs look in the mirror and see the roaring lion that I see in them. Right.
Yep.
It's such a powerful, powerful visual.
No, it absolutely is. And I wrote about it in the book, but Erica Karp, who's a CEO, I loved her small example of this, which is she just asks people, like, how was your day? And when they say they had a good day, she has them identify the moments that made it a good day and says, how can we get more of those into your day? Like, that's a great example of that coaching mentality, right? It's getting them to identify what made it a good day and saying, how can I partner with you to create more of those moments? And I think for our kids, for our colleagues, that's the model that I, don't always succeed at, but that's what I shoot for.
So good. Helping reinforce those moments because it's not natural. It's like we're so blind to these amazing things that happen during the day that we fly right by them. But to pull us back, call that time out and say, wait, did you see this? How do we do more of that? So good.
Yeah, we take most things for granted. And I think it's really important to sort of help people step back and be like, oh, actually, like, I am in a really like fortunate, incredible place. And yeah, there are moments, and I do have the power to make more of those moments. I'm not a victim in this.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, as we wrap up here, we have a couple minutes left. And I could sit here and talk to you for hours. I know we'll talk more in May and maybe even between then. But for those who might not, see you or get to hear from you again until May, what's one last word here? One last call to action. Not looking at me, looking at the screen. Those listening to this right now, one word from you that they need to hear from now until May in this season of time.
Just be courageous and be compassionate. I think those are the things that I just challenge everybody to think about and to just build that self-awareness. Because when you're courageous and when you're compassionate, your best self shows up and everyone around you shows up as their best selves. And it's really that simple.
It really is that simple. Be courageous, be compassionate. Aaron, I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for your
Right
work,
back at you.
grateful for your family's history and all that you have done to contribute so much to this world that so desperately needs it right now. So thank you for being your time today. Thank you for being a part of not just being a part of this movement, but championing this purpose movement. And thank you for contributing to the Purpose Summit in May. I can't wait. That's going to be a great
No, it's
3
gonna be a lot of
days.
fun. I can't wait. Right
Absolutely.
on. Well, thanks for everything you're doing, and I look forward to it.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you again. For those of you listening today, again, we're here with Aaron Hurst, founder of Imperative Taproot Foundation, author of the best-selling book, The Purpose Economy. We'll see you next time on the Finding Purpose Livecast.